Have you ever stopped to think about the weight of a last phone call? The voice that can be heard for the last time. Imagine a soldier sitting on the cold floor of a makeshift barracks, rifle leaning against the wall, hands shaking not from the cold, but from what he knows he's about to face. The metallic sound of boots echoes in the hallway. Outside, armored vehicles roar like impatient monsters. He looks at his cell phone, hesitates, and finally dials the number. The line rings. On the other end, a mother answers with a simple hello, and he knows he only has a few minutes to transform an entire life into a few sentences. There's no room to discuss politics, nor to complain about the food. There's only room to say he loves you, and, perhaps, to lie and say he'll be back. These phone calls carry more than words. They carry promises that can't always be kept. In many wars, from Kyiv to Baghdad, from Aleppo to Saigon, this scene repeats itself like a bitter echo of humanity. No matter the language, the uniform, or the flag, the silence that follows the hang-up is the same. A heavy silence, the kind of silence that seems to already predict that, the next day, some names will be crossed off the gift list and written on the fallen list. And the question, that remains as simple, yet brutal: if it were you, what would you say? To understand the weight of that last phone call, we must go back and look at the terrain where this war was born. Because battles don't begin the day the first shot is fired. They are planted years in advance, watered with speeches, suspicions, and interests that never make the front page of the newspapers. Here, the cause lies not just in the disputed border or the raised flag, it lies in the oil that flows underground. In the secret agreements signed in the shadows, in the promises of leaders who would never set foot on the battlefield. Think of a cold autumn morning, in a meeting room where suits and ties decide the fate of those in uniform. The map on the table shows lines drawn by foreign pens, as if human lives were pieces on a chessboard. But, while politicians take turns at the microphones, entire families are pushed into a future where goodbyes become routine. And that's where history bleeds to this day, because, deep down, nothing has changed. Those who profit from war are never those who face it head-on, and those who do face it bear scars for the rest of their lives. That's why telling these stories matters, so that every like, every subscription, and every comment here isn't just an automatic gesture, but a way of saying, these voices will not be forgotten. So, if you believe these stories need to be heard, support this channel, because what we're going to show you next will make it clear that this war, even from afar, is already knocking on your door. The painful present. War seems distant, but it invades the kitchen, the fuel tank, the minds of those who wake up early to work. Grain routes are blocked, ports are halted, ships wait for permission that never comes. Bread prices rise, gas prices rise, freight rates squeeze the margins of those who sell in the neighborhood. The owner of the small grocery store changes suppliers, accepts worse deadlines, cuts stock of basic items. The line at the checkout grows tense. No one shoots here, but each remarked label is a shot that hits the pocket. On the news, leaders promise stability. On cell phones, messages circulate with different versions of the same fact. Who believes whom? And when a soldier calls home, he hears in his family's voice that the battle has already arrived. On the bus, whispered conversations compare bills and fear. At the gas station, drivers count kilometers to avoid waste. Those who sell bread reduce their size. Those who buy swallow the cost with coffee. All this before the first shot rings. Out, on the roads connecting small towns, crowded buses carry families who have left behind their homes, their dogs, and their children's schools. At each stop a volunteer offers water and a blanket. He doesn't ask whose side they're on, he only asks how many are still to arrive. In makeshift shelters, thin mattresses are lined up like tired soldiers. There are soft cries at night, as the body tries to rest, but the mind returns to the sound of alarms. Those left behind face blackouts, sirens, and the weight of not knowing when it will be safe to leave. In neighboring countries, rent prices skyrocket. In distant neighborhoods, classrooms welcome children who don't speak the local language and stare at the board with silent fear. War transfers wounds without asking for passports. Wounds on the body. Wounds that don't show up on tests. Wounds that wake up with the sun and don't obey the clock. Meanwhile, those who have lost their jobs try to start over at street markets, fixing what they can, waiting for the call that brings relief. The impact crosses invisible borders. Companies that depend on parts from far away delay deliveries, suspend shifts, and send employees home. The cost of credit rises, and plans to open businesses are shelved. Those who buy imported medicine discover that the next shipment has no Update at the negotiating table. Contracts are redrawn with risk clauses, shorter deadlines, and higher fines. Insurance companies recalculate potential losses, and banks become more cautious. Air routes avoid danger zones, make long turns, and use more fuel. All of this pushes up the final price, but also affects people's mood. Patience wanes, traffic fights increase. At the bar, political discussions replace soccer. No one wins these conversations. Everyone leaves exhausted. In schools, teachers become a bridge between children who arrived yesterday and colleagues who have never heard a real alarm. In health clinics, psychologists work non-stop and call for backup. Today there are also those who manipulate suffering on social media. Coordinated campaigns flood timelines with convenient versions of events. Edited videos hide bombings, out-of-context photos inflame debates. Bots amplify messages that seem natural but were designed to divide. Journalists work under pressure amid censorship, fear, and the obligation to check every detail. Humanitarian organizations request secure access and receive bureaucratic responses that take lives. Meanwhile, authorities repeat speeches with words calculated to calm or inflame specific audiences. Amidst the noise, families of civilians and soldiers try to understand the truth. It's not simple. When credibility is lacking, any rumor finds shelter. And with rumor comes anger, and with anger comes the ease of accepting simple solutions to complex problems. It's in this realm that the last phone call weighs heavily. Those who answer don't want numbers. They want to know if they'll hug again. Those who feign peace, hey soldiers following orders and civilians simply trying to survive, pay the same bill in different ways. One loses sleep over the noise of the front. The other loses sleep over the noise of bills. If the border closes, exporters adjust prices, importers seek more expensive routes, carriers renegotiate tolls and insurance. Port cities feel it first, but the effect reaches the interior with the slowness of a dark tide. In boardrooms, leaders reorganize goals and admit that predictability has become rare. When the water reaches their chins, countries reevaluate alliances and absolve former rivals in exchange for energy, fertilizers, and safe routes. That's when the word sovereignty returns to everyone's lips. And, along with it, the uncomfortable question, who decides the price of our table? Until that answer appears, families continue counting coins and minutes. At the end of the day, the world readjusts habits. The present hurts because it demands payment without warning and makes the last phone call seem definitive. All this happens while the calls continue. On one end of the line, someone asks the other to eat, sleep, breathe. On the other, someone promises they'll return in one piece. Between them, the real world moves in small steps, pushed by interests and fears. This is the present that hurts and that sometimes seems to have no way out, but the story never ends in the present. It moves on to the next curve, where choices become destiny. If roads don't open, if words don't lower weapons, if leaders don't sit at the table, the next chapter may cost more than we're willing to pay. So the question no one likes to ask remains, what if it's with us next time? What are we willing to accept in the name of security? What are we willing to lose to defend dignity? When a country lights matches near a barrel, the smoke respects no borders. The noise begins with gunfire but ends in economic, social, and human upheaval. The next step matters, yes. Tomorrow doesn't always arrive. When it does, it can bring more of the same, with interest and haste. If no one slows things down, war reinvents itself, learns tricks, sheds its skin. Columns of tanks leave, swarms of drones enter, chasing heat and signal. Cities look up as if watching a light bulb about to snap. The fields sow in fear of the metallic hum that could emerge at any moment. In crisis rooms, red lines look like paint washed away by the rain. A single miscalculation is enough to unleash a chain of tragedies. Wary commanders cut short processes, authorize targets, and rely on old maps. The fog of war multiplies mistakes, and each mistake calls for revenge. If the answer comes faster than judgment, who holds back the next spark? Troops with little rotation make more mistakes, and pain becomes political. Rhetoric rises, bridges fall, and borders become as hard as locked doors. Gas and grain routes become hostages to shifting boards. When every gesture becomes a message, even rescue missions are read as a challenge. And in the midst of all this, the last phone call rings again, urging calm to those who only have minutes. Breathe. There is a possible route that avoids the abyss. It involves protected humanitarian corridors, transparent prisoner exchanges, and inspections accepted by all. It involves energy that doesn't weaponize winter and minimum guarantees for those who fear the next day. It involves courts that gather evidence now without waiting for the dust to settle, and the safe return of families. It involves rebuilding bridges that connect markets and schools, and a press that resists the noise. None of this is simple. It requires clear maps, verifiable deadlines, and visible rewards for every gesture of good faith. It requires that rival countries talk respectfully. It requires credible mediators, and that civil society have a seat at the table. If this route wins, the last phone call will return to being just another ordinary call, and peace then ceases to be a pause between gunfire and becomes a routine that protects lives. There is also the path that dispenses words. It beckons with greater offensives, with weapons now stored away so as not to cross a moral boundary that still resists. It speaks of munitions that tear apart entire neighborhoods and leave ruins where markets and schools once stood. It speaks of blind radars, downed satellites, and communications cut off in the middle of a call for help. It speaks of blackouts that plunge cities into long nights. It speaks of cyber attacks that paralyze hospitals during surgery. It speaks of borders opened on impulse and alliances drawn out by pride. The more one bets on this route, the narrower the exit becomes. Sanctions pile up, young people disappear from neighborhoods, and then the last phone call loses its future, becomes a memory stored in a cracked device. The natural course of this impulse is to push neighbors into the fire, dragging seas and air routes, swallowing the normalcy of countries that only wanted to work in peace. When fear rules, compassion turns to suspicion, and doubt becomes a sentence. Bitter, the unthinkable, still exists. The word barely comes out because it burns the tongue, but the risk doesn't disappear because it's taboo. Weapons that should never be used remain in silos and submarines. Speeches that downplay horror gain packed stages and prolonged applause. When leaders treat the enemy as a plague, the next step is often to justify the unimaginable. The world learned this lesson, then forgot, and then pretended to have learned it again. Between shocks and relief, the rules became flexible and the boundaries blurred. Today, what was unacceptable barely passes through votes and screens that normalize violence. The algorithm delivers packaged anger, and public conversation becomes a ring. In this arena, prudence gives way to haste, and patience becomes a preferred target. If this environment prevails, anyone who decides to stop before the abyss will be treated as a traitor. Therefore, direct channels between command and independent audits must function even under pressure and fear. Now the future could get worse without bigger bombs. It's enough for war to corrode from within, day after day, until it anesthetizes. Worsening could be an entire generation without school or recreation. It could be a country living on handouts and waiting in lines. It could be a trauma that grows in those who survive and then overflows at home and at work. It could be an economy learning to breathe on life support, without credit, without investment, and without breath. It could be politics hijacked by those who profit from fear. It could be science stalled because the budget was allocated to ammunition. It could be hunger returning to a map that had already changed color. It could be culture waning and artists silent. It could be the return of diseases that had become rare. It could be streets with more guns and fewer books, more bars and fewer meetings. It could be trust in institutions crumbling until no one trusts. It could be organized crime filling empty spaces with quick promises. It could be the return of old authoritarianisms with new names and simple slogans. It could be the feeling that the country has shrunk because traveling has become a luxury and dreaming has become a risk. It's heavy, and tomorrow isn't written, but it's being shaped now, line by line, through choices large and small. If leaders adopt clear goals, keep channels open, and verifiably protect civilians, the fire will die down. If local communities are heard in designing the exit, bridges will last. If justice goes hand in hand with reconstruction, peace will become a habit, not a pause between gunshots. If the world demands coherence from those who finance war, the fire will find less fuel. If networks reward investigation, not shouting, the air will become breathable. And if everyone looks at their own street, at the vote they cast, at the lie they choose not to share, the tide will turn. None of these measures are heroic, but they all save lives. The question then returns to us, without noise and without shortcuts. Are we willing to accept the cost of an imperfect peace to prevent a future perfect for violence? Because no last phone call should sound like a farewell, and the path to it exists. Decide today, when the phone goes silent, the sound of one's own breathing remains. It's in this interval that promises hang in the air like clothes on a clothesline before a storm. Those who stay at home learn to speak with photos and cook for two when only one makes it to the table. Those who go to the front learn to fit into a pocket, into folded notes, into saved audio messages that repeat "I love you" like a mantra. War may not begin with the first shot, but it usually ends with a goodbye left unsaid. Today you heard voices that could be yours, you saw faces that could live on your street. It's not a distant story, it's a mirror. It asks without shouting, how many goodbyes can a country hold before we realize the price has already risen too high? If war is far away on the map, it lives nearby in our pockets and in our chests. It's in the smaller loaf of bread, the more expensive gas, the light, sleep of those waiting for news. It's in the voice that trembles before saying "be well," and in the courage of those who respond, "I'll be back." Coming back isn't always coming back whole. Sometimes it's about returning with a new silence, with a look that measures exit doors, with a fright that wakes us in the middle of the night. The last phone call isn't just about goodbye, it's about everything we choose to keep when the world gets too tight. It's about what we're still capable of protecting when logic dictates giving up, and about the responsibility of not forgetting those who fell by the wayside. That's all. If war has many maps, truth has few paths. One involves listening unfiltered to what hurts, another involves recognizing that no uniform can erase the human condition. When a soldier calls home, he doesn't ask about geopolitics. He wants to know if his son's toothache has stopped, if the gas has arrived, if the key is still on the same hook. These small details are the real boundary between the world that resists and the world that collapses. Those who manipulate prefer numbers and slogans. Those who live prefer names and stories. That's why we guard these phone calls like someone protecting a flame from the wind. They illuminate what speeches try to hide. They remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to carry on despite it. They remind us that grief is not a statistic, it's an empty chair at the Sunday table. They remind us that some people didn't return, and those who did, returned different. If there is a way out, it begins by acknowledging this cost without glossing over it. It begins by giving a name to each absence and meaning to each return. It begins by accepting that asking for peace is not weakness. Weakness is pretending there's nothing to lose. It starts close to home. It starts now. Before hanging up, there's always something left to say. An apology, a piece of advice, a simple request like "come back soon." It's not always possible to fulfill it. Some didn't return, and that phrase weighs like a stone on our chest. Perhaps the point of telling these stories is to prevent the next goodbye from arriving so quickly. Perhaps it's to remember that no one is disposable. Perhaps it's to learn to recognize when to reject the logic of violence. You may not sign treaties, but you make choices every day. You choose what you share, what you finance, what you tolerate, what you keep quiet. Peace is born from these small, persistent decisions. It grows when we demand accountability, when we vote with memory, when we care for each other in the grocery line. It sustains itself when we respect those who think differently and when we make room for verified truth. Today you walked with me through hallways where every cell phone ring could be a goodbye. If this resonated with you, take a question to bed with you. What kind of country do we want to be when the next phone rings? A country that normalizes pain, or a country that protects its people? The answer doesn't fit in speech. It fits in tomorrow morning's practice. War feeds on forgetfulness. Peace needs your attention. Keep the peace now.